Welcome to NifnexTV, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming. We've got a really interesting topic here, which is one of the business challenges. How do you present a proposal or a tender? You know, there's a lot of different components that you've got to consider. One of them is the presentation of it, and you know, the creativity behind it. What's the content behind it as well? So those kind of topics. We've got an excellent panel here. If you can make themselves so welcome. So welcome. So we've got Jamie, we've got Sue, and we've got Diann. So we've got Diann addressing it from a creative and design perspective. We've got Sue addressing from the component, what goes into a proposal and a tender, and Jamie just the overall presentation and image perspective. So Jamie, would you like to start by introducing yourself, just about your business as well, so we can go around and we can address the case study after.
Yeah, of course. I'm Jamie Vine. I'm the CEO of Liberty Executive Offices. We provide serviced offices, meeting rooms, virtual offices to small, medium and large enterprises in Perth.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So I'm Sue Findlay. I have my own business called Bid Buddy. Most of my clients fall into three brackets. They're either small businesses who've just realised they need to start writing tenders and proposals to win more and don't know what to do. There are those larger businesses who do know what to do, but they don't have the time. And then there are those in between who realise that investing in a professional like me and getting the tenders written from an outsourced perspective is value for money. And so that's my business.
Hi, I'm Diann Bates from Creative Friction, a marketing and communications business that's been operating out of Perth for over 16 years. We have an eclectic range of clients, everything from mineral mining resource clients to SME clients, that we provide a wide range of marketing and communications for them. And we're often brought to assist in the tendering process for our clients when they're submitting for work, as well as doing just general submissions that may not be tenders but submission documents, etc. And helping them find that unique approach to their tender that helps them stand out from the crowd.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So can we stick with you in that case and get you to address the topic from your point of view?
Okay, so from a creative point of view, really you need to focus on your point of difference. And first impressions last. A professionally designed and produced tender document will help deliver the results that your business needs. The tender is like a mirror into your business and your ability to perform the desired results, etc. And the reader's going to judge you by that tender, certainly if you're not in a position to have a face-to-face consultation with them. One key value I came across recently is making sure that you make the use of a covering letter. Often tenders can be very restrictive in terms of the number of pages or content, but a covering letter is an ideal response to put information in that has not necessarily been asked for in the tender. You need to make a personal connection. If you were meeting somebody and trying to sell business face-to-face, you've got to try and build that relationship into your tender document, which isn't always necessarily easy based on the questions that are being asked. The other thing is to just create a very positive reflection of your business if you can. Weaving and ducking between the questions that you ask. Sometimes it's very difficult if it's multi-choice type questions and things like that, but where you can build on a positive reflection and you're ultimately trying to stand out from the crowd. The decision maker will often have to wade through a pile of tenders, and so you want to try and create that wow factor wherever you can. Be aware of do-it-yourself. Not everyone's necessarily got the budget to outsource their tender, but if you are going to be working on your tender, you really want to gear up and get as much knowledge as you can, read as much as you can about it, get insights from experts, etc. If you're re-tendering, you've already been submitting a tender, be very careful to rely on your existing reputation. You have to sort of go in as though you haven't ever attended that tender. And be prepared to make a significant investment in time, energy and creativity to nail it. Timing, plan ahead. That is, I mean, I've tendered myself for work, and you can never underestimate the amount of time a tender's going to make, and nothing worse than getting minutes from the closing of the tender and you've failed to get it on time. So definitely timing's huge. One of the things I'd get started with, again, as I've mentioned, is creative, just researching all your competitors, making sure you've got it there. Where you can, try and be creative, be memorable in your approach if you can. Make sure that your existing brand is up to scratch. A lot of people's brands are really letting them down in a visual capacity, etc.
So can they do something different to make it look better?
Well, yeah, look, ideally if your brand is quite dated, if the market's shifted and changed in the world of engineering or in the world of support mechanisms to business, etc., you look like you're stuck back in the 1960s and not in a cool Mad Men kind of way. You know, you need to really look at getting that brand tightened up. Also, what I see with a lot of clients is the business card looks different to the letterhead, that looks different to the website, that looks different to the brochure, which looks different to the flyer, and that just reeks of inconsistency, and that's going to say to a prospective business that you're planning to do work with, well, if you can't manage to get that suite of documents together, how can you manage to build our bridge or do our service or whatever that you're tendering for, etc. Another thing is to try and keep the layout quite clean and simple. The people reviewing the tenders have got millions of them to go through, so you don't want to have it overly complicated, but also designed in quite a sophisticated and easy to read way. Careful to follow through index numbers and things like that, sections. Obviously my colleagues here will talk about copywriting, etc. Making the most of information, pull-outs for tables and charts, creating interesting infographics instead of not necessarily lots of text-heavy information, making it as visual as you can. Weaving testimonials in where you can from existing clients about how successful you've been from key clients that are supporting you. Personalisation, trying to weave the client's name into the tender as though it's almost a given that you're doing work with them, repetition of their business and making it sort of like it's fait accompli. Production restrictions, also very carefully before you start the tender to make sure that it doesn't have to be done online, etc., and then your beautiful hand-tailored visual tender goes out the window, so there's some of those sorts of restrictions. So basically, you know, you only get a first chance to make a lasting impression, and just make sure that you've nailed that sort of point so that you leave a positive and lasting reflection and stand out from the crowd, basically.
Thank you, Diann.
Thanks.
Sue, from a content point of view,
Yeah, well,
the research that goes into it.
So there's two types of tenders and proposals. There's the unsolicited type, and then there's the ones that come out as a formal request document. They're both handled in similar ways, but there are rules around the request documents that you have to follow. But content is king. If you don't have enough time to make it beautiful and get the content right, spend the time on the content, because that's the bit that gets read, and that's the bit that has your value proposition in there. So before I talk about what to put into a proposal or a tender, I want to talk about what not to put into it. And what you don't put into it is lots of what I call blah blah about you as a company. Because if you've got any chance of winning it at all, they already know that. They know all about you. Unless it's an unsolicited tender or an unsolicited proposal, they've never heard of you. You're not going to win 99 times out of 100, but at least you'll get your brand in there and you'll get an excuse to have a conversation with them later. So nothing bores a buyer more than reading through rafts and rafts, reams and reams of aren't we good as a company. They don't need to know that. What they are seeking is what you are going to do for them. And that's where your value proposition comes in. That's where, as Diann says, you need to position yourselves from the competitors. You need to think about, so what will they be offering? What will they be giving? And then you need to say, so how do we appear to be different from what everyone else is going to be saying, because one of the most common things I find is everyone thinks they are unique, and when you ask them what their value proposition is, it's the same as their competitors and everyone else. Everyone says the same thing: we give better service. Well, how? Be tangible, be concrete. So there's 6 attributes that I look at when I'm writing a tender or a proposal. The first one is the buyer who's reading it has a very strong what's in it for me perspective. So they are looking for, how are you going to make them look good? So you have to appeal to the self-centered little part of our reptilian brain that is making the decisions in this process. So you have to give them what they are looking for. Don't tell them what you think they need unless they realise that's what they need. Position it a little differently, so you're giving them what they've asked for, and then you can have the conversation later if they really need something else. You're not going to win it if you don't give them what they think they've asked for. Secondly, you need to talk about what you've done, and you need to be concrete. When they ask for a methodology, you need to be concrete. You need to give them a project plan. You need to be to give them a step-by-step, blow-by-blow, concrete, tangible description of what you're going to give them, and link that to your price. So that when the competitor just gives them a price, but no, here's what you're going to get for that money, you are drawing a gap between that dollar figure and this dollar figure, which is substantiated. You need to make your bid look attractive and easy to read. So take all of the intangible, make every word count. When you're doing a review of it and an edit, take every word that doesn't add value and add a value proposition out of that tender. And you need to repeat a message, so stick to 3 to 5 repeating key themes about your value proposition, not you as a company, because that goes at the end if it's going to go anywhere. You talk about your value proposition, 3 to 5 key messages about that, and repeat them throughout the document. And if it's an unsolicited proposal, then you don't know where, you can put whatever you want in that document in whatever order you want. So put what you are going to give them up front, and then put the price almost at the back. So force them to look for the price so that they read the rest of your content. Otherwise, they'll look at the front page and they'll go to the back and they'll see the price, and they'll miss the great message in the middle. If it's a solicited tender, in which case there is a structured process that you have to go through, you must give them the content in the order in which they have asked for it in the document. Failure to do so means that you will shoot yourself in the foot. They won't look for any information that's not in that tender, in that place where they've asked for it, because they've got a tick box in the order of the request that went out. So you can forget about your covering letters if it's a requested tender, because covering letters don't factor into the tick box. They won't look to the covering letter for additional substantiating information. They will only look for where they've told you to put that information. So it's very, very important that you don't muddle up the order. And you must answer every question. So some of the questions are quite long and will contain lots of different aspects of, say, demonstrated experience. Make sure you underline each thing and answer that as a separate heading. So if they've asked for 16 things in demonstrated experience, you give them 16 headings with the answers directly to it. So I think I've eaten up my time. I could talk for hours on this, as you may have
Valuable
notes.
information. That's right.
I have an 86% success rate, so I'm very proud of that. And so I could talk all day. I can stop.
I think if I start doing more formal tenders, I'll be going there. My experience is in less formal tenders, so I'm not generally responding to a formal document. I'm generally responding to a requirement as such. What I would say is I agree with a lot of the points. I think perception's reality, so how you present and how that document looks and reads is obviously representing your business. I think anybody looking to use your business for the first time has an element of risk. You know, it is risky for anybody to use a new supplier for whatever that might be. So credibility is a large part of what I would say, certainly from an unsolicited point of view in particular, you know, they're looking for, they're looking to get some comfort that you can deliver. In terms of the kind of 3 or 4 points I've got, I think the first thing I would say is, which I think follows both cases, is to keep it logical. And I often do that by writing the content section first, just the headers. Just get a feel for, is that logical? Does that make sense? Is it where it should be? If I were reading it, would I want to read that next or that next? And get that contents section in the right order. It will also help you to focus your mind a little bit when you're writing, to make sure that when you get excited and carried away about your products, that you don't embellish something that's coming up in the next section. Right. So try and keep the content specific and relevant to that section.
Very relevant to a proposal that you put in rather than just even tender.
Absolutely, yeah. You've got a bit more freedom with a proposal than you would have with a tender. You know, with a tender, you've obviously got to follow quite a structure. The second point, we mentioned the word credibility, or I mentioned it. I think in terms of credibility, this is more aimed at the small to medium enterprises. Ask yourself, logo came up. Does your logo look like you did it on PowerPoint or not? Does it look professional? Your contact details, is it a PO box? Is it a mobile number? Is it a Gmail address? You know, if you don't look like you've invested in an office and in a telephone that somebody can answer when you're busy, and your own web server or email service that gives you your own domain name, that to me would reek of, it'd give me concerns. As a potential buyer, I would be worried about the credibility. If you've not even got those bits right, how can you get what I want right? Third point is to avoid buzzwords. We were talking about it earlier in terms of, you know, I think people get very tied up in their own industries and acronyms fly around, and actually only people within your industry really understand them, and you're not always dealing with somebody who's got your experience. So wherever acronyms are used in a tender request, then reuse them. But if you're using acronyms because they're needed and required, I'd always, at least once or twice in the proposal, put in brackets what that stands for, to give people certainty about what you're talking about, because otherwise you can come across as if you're just trying to confuse the reader. And then my final point would be to, wherever possible, in a tender situation, not always possible, but in a proposal situation, I would set deadlines. So I would say, look, in order for us to deliver what you want by the date you want it, then we need to achieve the following things and work backwards from that date, and make sure that both parties have something to do along that timeline, so that you've got a reason to keep talking, and you've got a reason to call that person and say, I needed you to have done this by this point, otherwise delivery is becoming more difficult. So it allows you to create urgency through your nervousness around hitting their deadlines, rather than just being a pushy sales guy, effectively. I mean, from my perspective, I'm from a serviced office business, so the majority of the proposals I generate are for potential occupiers of our space. So whilst it's quite often not the world's biggest amount of money, it's a big decision for a client as to where, you know, they're going to base themselves. Yeah. So what we're trying to do in our proposals, because of that being the audience, is just make them feel comfortable that, one, we told them everything. There will be no hidden extras. There will not be anything that's going to take you by surprise once you've committed to something. And that we can deliver the service levels that we're promising. You know, and that's quite often difficult to get across in a document. But in our case, we've generally met the person. They've generally seen the space by the time they get a proposal, which is very different to some of the other processes.
So if I could just add to that. So a proposal is generally, there's quotes, proposals and tenders. A quote is when someone wants something and they're very clear about what they want, and it's relatively small value, so they just want a price. So when you respond back to that, you generally just give them a price with some credibility statements around that price. When a buyer is not clear about what they want, or they're not terribly concerned about the method in which it will be delivered, then they will seek proposals, and it's up to the suppliers then to basically write the specification. So they'll say, well, we want this outcome, and then you will propose how you can achieve that objective and deliver the outcome. So it can be a formal document, as in through a formal process and a structured document, but there is a lot of solution development in preparing that proposal. A tender, on the other hand, is generally a word used for as a process for when the buyer knows exactly what they want, they are very prescriptive about it, and they're asking for formal responses, but it's basically a price they want. But there's also they want to know some capability statements around you delivering that, because it's a high-risk purchase. So they want to make sure that they're purchasing from companies who have the credibility and and all of the other things that my colleagues here have been talking about. You know, they have the bona fides, and that they are a safe, low-risk buy from that buyer's perspective. And the process is to ensure governance around the process, so that the buyer doesn't get his mates in to deliver on a $10 million contract, because there's laws against that, apparently. And it's very hard to justify it at the board level. So they put it through a formal process to protect everybody. The unsolicited proposal is when you think you've got an opportunity with a buyer and you put something in front of them. And that's when you can be quite creative, and you can really put your best foot forward, because you have control over that document, not the buyer.
One of the challenges I've seen in around the unsolicited and solicited is the scope of the tender that you'll be given, and often they are cut and paste from one tender document to the other, and one of the biggest frustrations you'll come across is often they're not in a logical order for you to tell your story. Kind of the end comes before the beginning in terms of how you want to sort of roll out your sales pitch to them, which can be incredibly frustrating. You'll also find questions that make complete and utter nonsensical sense because they're actually from an entirely different tender, which often gets quite difficult to deal with, and at certain times very difficult to negotiate not answering that question within the scope of the tender, etc. So those can certainly be some of the frustrations between the two different types of tender, and obviously between them you have the more flexibility to be creative with your tender, as opposed to other tenders. For example, a lot of tenders are submitted online. You are obviously in a visual creative standpoint extremely limited what you can do, and that's where copywriting and content becomes even more critical to be able to sell yourself and getting that in the right order.
That's right. The buyers actually prefer online because it flattens the playing field. So everyone has to submit on the same set of rules. There's no ability to have the visual impact that you rely on to get your brand across, and the subconscious messages. And they don't like it when you put pictures and attachments and that sort of thing in. As buyers, they just want to have X number of documents side by side, and they'll evaluate that criteria and then the same criteria on all of the others, and they'll put them side by side and sort of grade on the scale, if you like. And it's tough when you are submitting online.
It's going to depend on the individual and what your offering is to that, and how relevant your service is to the particular client. One thing I might add there, I don't want to name names, I have a particular client who is a government client, and when they ran their tender out for a creative proposal, 99% of the tender was about your occupational health and safety and your insurance, and basically you're working at heights and your were your vehicles insured to be on site, etc. I've never gone on site for this client. I've only gone to the head office in Perth, but they're all around Western Australia. Again, that can be, those types of tenders are incredibly, that's what I was saying, a lot of tenders are rehashed. And it's very difficult sometimes that the tenders are not well crafted, which is a huge frustration. But as a business, you have to look at where you best serve. You can belong to things like Tenders WA, help me out, people. I belong to a thing called Tenderlink, where I can put in the parameters of the clients that I'm interested in knowing about, and on a multi-weekly basis, as tenders come out, they'll feed them through to me. Can cost about $1,500 a year to subscribe or something along those lines. So you can review what particular tenders are appropriate for your service offering.
So government has to advertise tenders. Private businesses don't. And if you're interested in oil and gas or the mining industry, for example, they only invite select tenders. In other words, that's jargon for they will choose who they want to invite to submit a bid. If they are looking for potential proponents, they'll go through their SAP system or their ERP system and look at who's been registered in that system. They may do a Google search or something like that, but you'll never see those advertised unless you get on to enterpriseconnect.com.au, and some of those opportunities will be advertised through the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. But generally speaking, private industries, you have to have a relationship with them beforehand. They have to know who you are, so you get a shot at being invited to bid. Yeah. But Tenderlink and the Walga website, they often use Tenderlink. There's 100 and something, 60 something, or maybe more local government authorities. Most of them advertise on their own website. So there's a lot of websites to look at.
If you are keen on regularly tendering, I'd highly recommend a portal like Tenderlink or something like that, because it's just too difficult to track all the tenders all the time that might come up somewhere, and they do get a fair example of them.
By a search facility, pay the money. There are a few out there. The problem with putting your too much content out there is that there's no code of practice governing a lot of these organisations. Certainly there is around government, but local, non-government organisations aren't bound by codes of conduct unless they've got their own internal codes of conduct. Now, I've seen some very poor behaviour where people have submitted their tenders, unsolicited proposals, and they've turned up elsewhere, word for word. Or they've been used, copied and pasted into a public document that then has gone out to all of your competitors for pricing. So I would be very cautious about putting a lot of intellectual property into an unsolicited bid. In fact, my advice is don't. If it's unsolicited, unless you are going to use that as an opportunity to go in and have a conversation with that target company, I wouldn't put any effort into an unsolicited proposal, because the chances of winning is very low. There are other more cost-effective ways of building a relationship with them.
We recently were successful in a tender that was by local government, and this, which is possibly quite unusual, they selected, I think it was 3 creative studios And in that part of the tender was you had to provide a submission, a creative submission to them, and you got a detailed brief, and then they selected from, you basically put your cards on the table of what you were delivering. They paid a nominal fee, I think it was about $300 or $500 to submit. Clearly falls well short of the work that you've done, but if you were successful, you got all the ongoing work that they had, and we were successful. So
Congratulations.
Thank you, that was a win. So that was quite unique, and as a business I had to sit there and hedge my bets. Am I going to commit X amount of hours to creating this in order to nail it? Because if you did basically a half-assed job, you weren't going to be successful. So I guess that's what you weigh up as a business, the cost of doing that sort of scope of works, I guess, in order to get the work.
Yeah, my advice is if there is any design component or consulting component to winning that work, make sure you get paid for it, is my advice. And local governments will buy architectural services in the same way, almost the same way. They'll go out to an EOI first, an expression of interest, which is as much work as a full-blown tender. And they use that to select a short list of companies that they like the sound of and they want to work with. And then they will invite the tender where they actually have to prepare a concept design. And they pay for that. So they'll pay $10,000 or something for each concept design, and then they'll select the concept design, and then they move on to detailed design, build, construct, etc. So that's becoming a more common way of buying innovation or creativity. But if you are going to do any work where you have been asked to prepare or help them write the specification, make sure you get paid for it, because politics step in often in companies, and you find that the work that you were promised you would win this if you did all this stuff for free, but then someone else steps in and says no, it has to go out to the market, and then you find you've done your money and you've had all your intellectual property used as well. So I've seen, unfortunately, a number of cases where that's happened to companies, and it's just the way it happens. It's not deliberate, it's not malicious, but it happens.
My top tips were all around, obviously based on what I do, were all around the small to medium type businesses leasing office space, because that's an area that I'm very passionate about, and it's also the more I look at it, in a downturn there's volatility, in a boom there's volatility. Predicting your headcount as a business, your office-based headcount, is extremely difficult, and really that's where my top tips come from. So the first one is all about size. I could say size matters. It does. It doesn't necessarily have to be big. It should be small. It should actually fit, is the key. So it's about getting office space that suits a business right now. If you're looking to take any form of reasonable commitment on commercial real estate, and that commitment is beyond your visibility of your workload and your ability to forecast your staff, that's a very dangerous piece of paper you're about to sign. So we obviously recommend that people look for a solution that's got flexibility. So that's the first thing. Something that allows you to, I think the buzzword these days, even though we don't use buzzwords, is to right size. To get a piece of space that works for you today, knowing you can get more tomorrow, and you can give some of it back the day after if needs be. So that flexibility is key. The second one, when you're looking at leasing spaces, is to be aware of the cash implications, the cash flow. There's a lot of costs that aren't always apparent. There are big bonds with landlords, and there's fit out, there's furniture, there's telephone systems, and even to a certain extent, and I'll come on to that later on, that there are costs when you leave as well that may not be that that visible at the front end. So, you know, the tip there is just make sure you've got all the costs identified and not just the rent and the outgoings. They are such a small part of the cost of running an office. It's scary. So be clear on that. Which leads me on to exit costs. You know, the fact that there are so many subleases available in Perth at the moment, it literally demonstrates how many people got it wrong. Because a sublease is something that people are trying to let because they don't need it anymore, but they're still committed to it. So a sublease, the sublease market has gone crazy, and it's gone crazy because too many people committed to something too long when they didn't have visibility. If you take on a sublease, there will quite often be make good provisions in the lease, which is effectively, it can be as bad as it's your responsibility to refurbish the space when the lease finishes. New carpets, new ceilings, new painting the walls. It can literally be your responsibility. Not always, but it can be. So the third tip is to take legal advice and make sure you get that lease read by somebody who knows what it's saying. Because believe me, I've been through a few of them, and quite often they're not saying what you think they're saying when you read them yourself. Number 4, stay nimble. Flexibility, I've covered it earlier with size, but just understanding that businesses change at the drop of a hat. We're all here in Perth. You know, in Perth, we see a market that went crazy 2011 to 2012, then fell off a cliff 2012 and 13. Looks like it's hopefully bottomed out on its way back up again. But how do you take on a long-term commitment with that kind of sort of cyclicality? You need to be conscious of that and try and have a solution that allows your overhead to flex in line with your workload. And the final point is to do the detail. So if you, look, in reality, the only place you can get all this flexibility is in a serviced office environment generally, which is what I do, which is why I'm talking about it. But we're not all the same. When you go out to the serviced office market, there are a lot of gimmicky type transactions, a lot of special offer deals. And invariably, what you need to be conscious of is just doing the detail. Read the terms and conditions. Ask all the questions, because quite often the other operators can be just looking to get occupancy in order to then recoup their discounts, you know, via on-charging for telephone systems or people using more than their data bandwidth. There are really 10 things you should look for. I've only named 5. We do have a top 10 tips of buying serviced offices available on our website, which is a download. It's free. It's a report, you know, and it's meant to be. Obviously, we wrote it because it puts us in good light, but it puts us in good light because we do things well. So it's worth downloading if anybody's out there looking for space.
So it's www.liberty
libertyofficers.com.au. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sue, would you like to share your 5 tips, or you've already addressed them?
Yes, I'll continue with the same theme. A lot of my clients come to me to write their first ever tender response because the market's changing and buyers are becoming more and more savvy and sophisticated, and companies that traditionally just picked up the phone and got a few quotes are now required by their board or whoever to use a formalised process. And so companies who've done the same job or worked for the same company for 25 years are now finding that suddenly they've got to bid to have a contract renewed. So if you find yourself in that position where you've never submitted a tender before, you need to be ready, because these things just come out of the blue. For example, in my business, I can't fill a pipeline. I could be sitting there just doing my bookwork one day because I haven't got any work, and then within an hour I've got 5 tenders that are closing in the next 2 weeks. It's just that kind of industry. So you need to be ready. The first thing you need to do is make sure, and you've heard it from both Diann and Jamie, that all of your collateral aligns. So go and get yourself a graphic designer and make sure that you have a logo, you have a style guide for from your documents, and you have a consistent colour theme, and that you have a template that's ready with a nice cover sheet. So the next time you write a proposal, it looks professional. Then the next thing you need to do is make sure that everyone's got CVs in your company. You'd be surprised at how many companies don't have CVs, or their key personnel, which are their directors and their managers, don't have CVs because haven't needed one for 15 years because they've been running the business. Make sure everyone's got a CV and a resume, which is a summary version of your CV, and a profile. So profile is about 1/3 of a page with a head and shoulders photograph. And put them into a folder and make sure they get updated at least once a year. That'll save you a lot of time. And make sure that the font is the same size, it's the same font, and that the colour scheme is right. The third thing is make sure, if you're in a service-based industry, you will need to provide probably training records or evidence that you have the best capacity and capability within your organisation. So make sure that you have collected everybody's training records if you're in a service-based industry, and that they are all in one place, and that you have electronic copies of the most important qualifications, because they will be needed as evidence in a tender situation. The fourth thing that you need to do is make sure you have an org structure, that your organisation has an organisational structure, and that you actually know how many people are in the organisation, and that you have head and shoulders photographs of all of the management in the organisation. And the last thing is, don't wait until it's a must-win tender. Inevitably, when a small business gets to a certain size, they're going to need to enter into contracts. To enter into contracts, you generally need to go through that whole courting process where you submit a proposal, it gets accepted, and you get a contract to sign. And more these days, that process is becoming formalised. So don't wait to test all of this new collateral that you've got out on a must-win tender, because chances are it will be a very stressful process. So if that must-win tender comes up, get a professional to help you and take the worry and the strain out of the process. And then you just focus on getting the content and leave a professional to making the bid look credible and professional.
Thank you, Sue.
I think I'd just like to stress that first impressions in a tender, whether you're repeating a tender with a client, etc., you're still making a first impression every time that you do tender, and that attention to detail is key throughout the whole document. And also, I think trying to make the personal connection, I think, is if you can in any way. Wholeheartedly starting with, if you haven't already, a really foundational brand that's going to help you tell the story and live the professionalism of the service that you're going to offer. And I think it's a wise counsel there to probably even test drive a few tenders to start with, just so that when a tender does come along, and often some of them have quite limited turnaround times of getting your act together and finding all that information, at least you've got the core foundations, like you're saying, the staff hierarchical chart and the bios on all the staff and the photography. Another key thing I would say is make sure that you use quality photography in your images, and not always possible, but steer away from using stock photography, because you'll find your competitors are using stock photography as well, and if you're using that same hero shot in your tender that your competitors are using, it's not a win. So particularly for staff shots and things like that, even though I take a great picture on my iPhone, you want to really think about that. The other points, again, for me, having done tenders myself as well, is just timing. Don't leave it too late. I have left a tender and it was an online lodgement and it was taking its time to lodge. It didn't go through. And we'd spent 40, 60 hours on that tender and left it way too late to the end, and that 40, 60 hours was down the drain and gone.
And how did it feel?
Don't go there.
This is like 5 minutes.
It's
Yeah. Or your printer stops functioning while you're trying to print it out has been another case, and things like that. So really, just really prioritise. Don't leave things till the last minute, I think, is my biggest recommendation.
And if I could add to that, make sure you've got redundant everything. So redundant data connections, redundant printers, redundant whatever, so that you don't.
And ultimately put it in days before it's required.
It's very stressful, isn't it?
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Diann. I'm sure it's valuable information. Now you can all go tenders out there and speak to the experts here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll do more case studies next month. Thank you. Thank you.